What's up, everyone? It's Hailey Salvian and Sean Gentili here with you for another Thursday edition of the Athletic Hockey Show. The trade deadline is just one day away. NHL insider Chris Johnston will join us shortly to discuss what we can expect before the bell rings Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. First, let's bring in Sean Gentili. We've already seen a couple moves so far at the deadline. We haven't talked to each other in a while. It's our first pod back since the Milan Olympics. I guess I was on the show while I was in Milan. It's all kind of a blur. I don't remember much about those 3 weeks.
I was going to say, and
it's not because I was, partying around Italy. I just wasn't sleeping.
How about you tell me if you were on the show when you were in Milan? Were you?
I don't know. I can't recall. I think maybe twice.
I think during our last record, you were somewhere in the airspace over, I don't know if you were in Switzerland or wherever you were. I lost track of you.
Oh no, it was in the arena after the women's gold medal game. And I had to have the camera
I don't know
off.
if you were specifically, you could have been anywhere,
I was standing in front of like a really generic wall. And Jeff was like, no, you have to have your camera off. I was like, no one's going to know this is Santa Julia.
I think you might have been outside the arena. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yes.
I don't remember. It doesn't matter.
That's where that took place.
Anyways. So I apologize to everyone. My voice sounds terrible because I'm still in the post-Olympic. Went to bed at 4 a.m. every day. You're working a million hours mode. But it's the trade deadline, so I'm here. It's fine.
Oh,
I can't call in sick today.
Thanks.
All the listeners are probably like, ooh, I wish you would have.
Har, har,
har. All right. We've already seen a couple of moves so far. We can talk a little bit about these before bringing in CJ as we look ahead to Friday's trade deadline. MacKenzie Weevar to Utah with 4 years left on his deal. That's the big one that stands out to me, and we can start there. He agreed to waive his no trade clause for the deal to be completed. Calgary is set to receive defenseman Olli Maatta and 3 2026 second-round picks. These are Utah's. One of them is Utah's own selection, one from the Sens, one from the Rangers, and also a prospect. Do you have a thought on this deal for MacKenzie Weevar and Utah? I like it for the Mammoth. Get him out of there.
I think I like it for both sides. Honestly, yeah. Weevar hasn't been great this year. There is like a little bit of an asterisk there. Good as a player as MacKenzie Weegar's been over the last several years, going back certainly to when he was with Florida. There's a lot of miles on his tires. And there was some concern. I talked to some people about that for an off-season project where people are like, I don't know, is he? He's only 32, but he's logged some pretty hard miles over the years. So there was concern over the potential that he was going to hit some kind of wall relatively soon. And his performance in Calgary hasn't quite been up to snuff with what we've come to expect from him, right? So there has been some degree of drop off. Can you attribute that to just simply playing for the Flames? Like, I think that's also very possible, right? And I think you put him in a different environment on a better team. I like what he can bring to Utah, not just this season, but for the next little bit. So yeah, I do like that trade for the Mammoth. I think that's a win for Craig Conroy too. I like the approach of getting multiple second round picks and having that be the basis for that deal. I think in some ways I would rather have 3 second rounders than 1 potentially late-ish first rounder. Like I think that's a good win for Craig Conroy. I think it makes sense to generally stockpile picks in the second because we've seen that from teams who've successfully exited rebuilds over the last couple years, including the Utah Mammoth. Those are good assets to have, whether you use them on players, whether you use them like the Pittsburgh Penguins have over the last year or so. You flip one for Yegor Shinnikov, which is paying off for Pittsburgh, on and on. I think we've seen second round picks, be pretty useful, particularly over the last couple of years. So I think it was good on the Flames and good on Craig Conroy to add a few of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like Weegar is a right shot D. Those don't come cheap this time of year. He's got another 4 seasons on his contract. He's an upgrade on Olli Maatta. That much is true, regardless of age-related decline. And they didn't have to give up a top prospect or a first rounder to make this deal happen. And only one of those second rounders was one that they own themselves. So I like it for both sides. I agree with you, Sean. And especially, we'll hear from CJ later in the show. We know that the free agent market's not great this summer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to go out and get a right shot D that's got some term, this is your time to do it. And I think the Mammoth got ahead of it. And I think this deal looks even better when we compare it to, like we're saying they didn't have to give up a first rounder. Sure, it was 3 seconds, but I'd rather be the Utah Mammoth than the Edmonton Oilers right now.
Yes.
And what they've given up in their trade. So they trade for Connor Murphy. That's the first deal that comes through from the Chicago Blackhawks for a second round draft pick. But then there's the Jason Dickinson deal. Sean, you're not a fan of this one. Let me pull up the exact details here because they're not great. Do you have a thought first, Sean? Well, I have 8 tabs open. It's a trade deadline, folks.
I do. It's brutal asset management by Stan Bowman. I think what we see here is he has to send a first round pick back to Chicago basically to cover up for a mistake that he made with the Andrew Mangiapane deal. Like you sign Mangiapane to a contract that was questionable at the time. It's not 2022 anymore or whenever Mangiapane was at his best with Calgary. He's pretty far removed from that. I think anybody who watched him in Washington last year could attest to that. So he signs him to a deal that seemed like it was going to be a problem at the time. It's a team that doesn't have money to play with from a cap standpoint. We've seen that, dating back to, the Blues offer sheet saga, right? Like they don't have pennies to pinch here. So every dollar counts. And the fact that they have to meaningfully improve this team, and the only way to go about getting that done is by attaching a first round pick along with Andrew Mangiapane's contract, along with 50% retained from the Blackhawks, which also costs Edmonton on the back end to bring back Jason Dickinson is brutal. And I think ultimately you're looking at this, the Oilers are a train wreck right now. And the big ads, and CJ spoke to this, they shouldn't just automatically assume that Edmonton's done. They do have a little bit of space to play with. But their big ads right now are looking like Connor Murphy and Jason Dickinson to a team that's come up short, I think, in a lot of different ways. Particularly,
Groundhog Day.
What's that?
Groundhog Day.
It's Groundhog Day. You have poor secondary scoring. You have another bad bottom six. It's a bad defensive team. Goaltending's an issue. This is the same problems for Edmonton with different faces, and I don't think that anything about these last couple of deals, even though Dickinson and Murphy are both useful in their own way.
Yeah.
I don't think that changes anything here.
Yeah. So the details was, Jason Dickinson and Colton Dach for Mangiapane and a first round pick in 2027. And then there was some salary retention. Yeah. And Jason Dickinson's been like a good defensive player for the Blackhawks. He could slot in as a great 3C, but like if I'm an Oilers fan, I don't know why I'm excited about that again, because it's just Groundhog Day. You've got Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. You need more saves. You need more secondary scoring. And it's like, how is it 2026 and we're having the same conversation? It's a joke, but let's...
The parallels between Edmonton and the 2010 to 2014 Penguins are crazy. I saw this discussion happening yesterday. It's superstars surrounded by inconsistent goaltending, let's say.
I think that's kind of goofy because the Penguins had already won a Stanley Cup.
Completely.
I'm sorry, that's not the same.
Yeah, that's where.
And then they won another too. So.
And that's where I was going with it.
Okay, sorry. I was like, that comp is dumb.
The difference for as brutal as the Pittsburgh Penguins were in the playoffs from 2010 to 2014, and as brutal as that lineup was, where it's AHL defensemen and replaceable fourth liners surrounding two superstars. The difference was that they already won a cup and that they came out of it and won 2 more. So we know that Edmonton hasn't accomplished what Pittsburgh did on the front end of that, and it's certainly debatable whether they're going to be able to accomplish it on the back end. So yeah, it is. It's just it's frustrating. It's frustrating for someone who just watches the league and pays attention to things. I can't imagine how frustrating it is for A, Oilers fans, and B, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And this is just the latest bit of proof there.
Yeah, it's rough. Okay, we've teased that CJ's coming on. We also haven't mentioned the Blues, according to sources to our lovely staff, Jeremy Rutherford, Matthew Fairburn, Chris Johnston. They all worked together on this story yesterday. According to sources, the Blues have agreed to trade defender Colton Parayko to the Sabres pending Parayko's approval. That story came out 12 hours ago?
Wednesday afternoon is when it came out.
What's the holdup here? Is this deal going to materialize? It's a good thing we have Chris Johnston coming on the show to help us understand what's going on here. That's coming up next on the Athletic Hockey Show. All right, joining us now is NHL insider for The Athletic and TSN. He's going to have a busy day tomorrow. He's also the host of the Chris Johnston Show. It's Chris Johnston. What's up, CJ? Thanks for doing this. I know it's going to be a busy couple days for you here.
Yeah, it's been fun, though. I don't know why. Maybe having not as much lead up because we had the Olympics might have kind of compartmentalized this for me. Usually I'm totally burnt out by now, but I'm feeling fresh and ready to go.
All right. We got to start here, though. What's the holdup on Colton Parayko? As we're recording this right now, we can peel back the curtain a little bit just in case something changes in the next 2 hours. But we haven't seen a deal materialize yet. What's the holdup? Could this happen in the next couple hours before the bell rings on Friday?
The holdup in this case is pretty simple. It's that he's got a no trade clause and has the ability to stop a trade like this. And I think it's something that he needed time to process and think through, work through with the people he trusts in his life. You know, I was told early Thursday to expect that this will go through. So at this point, I'm operating on the assumption that that's going to happen. You know, the Blues played in Seattle on Wednesday, so they're on the West Coast. It might take a couple hours depending on what time everyone's getting out of bed and getting that paperwork filed. But I don't think there's any issues when it comes to the exact deal being discussed. Don't have all the pieces of that in place or know exactly what the trade looks like beyond, you know, the reports of it being Merck, the defenseman that Buffalo drafted in the first round last year, plus a first round pick as part of this package. But, you know, it gets messy around trade deadline is the best way I could put it, right? I mean, there's obviously a huge push for people like myself to report on these kind of stories. I think sometimes trades are completed in more sloppy of a manner, I'll call it, just because there's a bit of a rush and there's different competing forces around these things. And so obviously this one went public maybe a little sooner before all the I's and T's had been crossed and dotted. But I do think it's going to come through here on Thursday.
Yeah, so that's just the way the cookie crumbled on this one. Like, there's nothing to read into, but on as far as the lag between the reported details and the completion time, like it's just sort of the way things fell out. Is that where we're at on it?
Yeah, that's my impression. You know, I don't think this is a case. It could be interpreted from afar. You think maybe a team's exerting pressure on the player. You know, I don't read into it that way. I mean, my understanding here, obviously, is that Parayko, you know, wanted some time to think through things. He didn't just jump out of bed and, you know, at his pregame nap and you know, sign off on the no move clause, no trade clause, and, you know, allow the trade to go through on Wednesday. But, you know, it doesn't seem as though there's any ill will. I mean, look, and Colton Parayko has been a St. Louis Blue for a long, long time. You know, I think he and the other veteran players on that team understand where they're at. A number of their names have dotted our trade board for months now, frankly. And really, if you go back to last season, a lot of Blues, including Parayko, were on the trade board then. So, you know, this has been a long time coming. And you know, I think that ultimately, you know, he's going to get to where he needs to get to, at least based on the information I have to sign off on that deal. But a little unusual to have it drag on, I guess, other than the fact we saw something, not the exact same circumstances, but with Tyler Myers, it took a few days for his deal ultimately to go through and end up being a different trade than the initial one the Canucks brought to him. So a lot of players with no movement, no trade clauses out there, and it has an impact on the timing of everything.
Mm-hmm. Might as well ask about Robert Thomas now. Obviously, Parayko's teammate with the Blues. We'd seen him connected pretty directly to the Sabres on Wednesday is when that really hit the fan. You got fans in Buffalo chanting Robert Thomas. Where do things stand with him, and how likely is it that not necessarily the Sabres, but how likely is it that something gets done with him somewhere before the deadline?
Well, the Sabres, those reports were true. I mean, the Sabres were heavily involved in Robert Thomas, while also trying to get a right shot defenseman out of St. Louis. That ultimately led us to the point where they narrowed in on that Parayko package, and that deal happened. And, you know, I think where things are with Thomas, frankly, is that it's not dead yet. You know, the Utah Mammoth have been connected to him for a long time now. You know, we saw them make a pretty big trade to get MacKenzie Weevar out of Calgary on Wednesday. And even after doing so, you know, I believe the Mammoth are well positioned to still take a run at Thomas. they gave up a lot for Weegar. They gave up 3 second-round picks that they had in the 2026 draft, but they didn't touch any of their first-rounders. They didn't touch any of their top prospects. And obviously, if a Thomas deal is going to happen, you're looking at probably three significant assets at least to get him from St. Louis. I think Utah should be viewed as the most likely team if something happens. And if it's going to happen, I think it has to happen on Thursday, because much like Colton Parayko, as we've learned here, Robert Thomas has a no trade clause. And, it might take him some time to, work through, does he want to waive it now? The pros and cons of that kind of decision. He's obviously got a number of years left on his deal. So it's not just about, hey, is it a city I don't mind spending some time in? The team has a chance to win this year. I mean, it's a lifestyle decision beyond just the hockey aspect of it. So, I think basically we're either going to get Thomas news or not on Thursday. If not, this conversation will probably be picked up in the offseason. But, the sense I have with the Blues is that they really do want to turn things over. And moving off a player like Parayko kind of tells us that. He was a key part of their Stanley Cup win in 2019. He'd signed a long-term extension there, a big part of their culture. Thomas, I know he's younger and people are saying, why do you want to move him? I really do believe they're trying to clear the decks. They're going to have a change in the front office with Doug Armstrong after this deadline, effectively moving up to the president's role exclusively and having Alex Steen become their GM heading into next year. And we sort of saw something similar like this when David Poile was going out in Nashville a couple of years ago. He made some big trades to try to set the table for his successor in Barry Trotz. And so, I do think that St. Louis will be a key player yet still before this deadline, even after the Parayko trade goes through. Whether or not it's Thomas probably depends on where the offer gets to. I mean, this is just, it's not a player they have to trade ultimately. Mm-hmm. And it's not someone they can afford. Most teams around the league feel they don't have a true first line center beyond the obvious ones, beyond maybe those at the top of the standings. And so to give one up in mid-career who signed to a pretty good contract, I think they have to make sure they're getting back the right return. And I still think that there's a deal to be cooked there between the Mammoth and the Blues, but they have to actually get down to business and get it done today.
Yeah, you mentioned this in relation to the Mammoth. They keep their powder dry, right? They don't move a first-round pick for Weegar. They don't move any of their top 5 prospects. They keep the cupboard stocked enough if they want to do something with Thomas. Now, you look at what the Sabres did potentially in the Parayko deal. You could say that they moved in a similar fashion, right? Like they still have assets there. Is it crazy to say that they're still a potential player in the Thomas discussions, or does it seem like they took themselves out of it with the Parayko deal?
To be candid, I don't know. I don't know where they stand. I certainly see the Sabres as a team that's going to still be aggressive. I think it's clear Jarmo Kekalainen recognizes the moment that is at hand in Buffalo. You just see the enthusiasm that the fan base has had lit under it. I mean, no fans have really taken it worse than they have over 15 years. I mean, they've lost basically almost a generation and a half, have not seen playoff hockey there. So it's important, I think, for them to get in, and they're in a pretty good spot right now, but also to have a chance to make some noise. And they don't want to be making just short-term moves. I mean, they're trading for a guy like Parayko, if they're chasing a guy like Thomas, or even if they make other moves, I think, they're going to be looking at players with some term on their deals. They want to not just, rent a few players for assets and potentially lose them for nothing this summer. They're looking at a bigger picture in Buffalo because they're hoping this is the opening of a window where they're going to have a number of years in the playoff window. So, I think that wouldn't surprise me if they're back in, but I don't have any information specific to that. It might be tough for them to do, just given the fact that, they took a run at it and they weren't able to hammer something out with St. Louis and then pivoted to this deal. It just might be a sign that they're not able to align, I think, specifically on not future facing pieces, but more, not the future facing pieces, but more perhaps the ones that, are playing for the team now is sure. Part of what held up my understanding of that Thomas deal that the Sabres and the Blues were discussing. So, this is kind of how the league's supposed to work. I mean, this is an interesting trade deadline. You have the Buffaloes buying, you have Utah out there, the former Arizona Coyotes. I mean, these organizations that have been at the bottom, that have stockpiled assets, are now on the rise. I'd say look out for the Detroit Red Wings at this deadline. They've been quiet to this point, but they're another team, I think, that could step forward and make some interesting trades. And so, it's bad if you're I guess if your team has been in the playoffs every year and they're not going to make it, but the league's pretty interesting right now in my eyes.
Let's get to the Toronto Maple Leafs here too. We can follow up on the Red Wings because that's super interesting, CJ. But the Leafs scratched defenseman Oliver Ekman-Larsson and forward Scott Laughton and Bobby McMann yesterday night against the New Jersey Devils. Like shortly after, Craig Berube said, like, nope, nothing going on there. We're not going to be holding anyone out for trade-related reasons. And I go back to my days covering Brad Treliving and the Calgary Flames, and he would always say, I take my cues at the trade deadline from my team. And we'll probably hear Tree say that tomorrow when you guys interview him on TSN or whenever the Athletic people get a clip from Tree. So what cue are the Leafs giving Brad Treliving right now? Like, what does this move, scratching these players, tell us about what the Leafs could be doing on Friday?
Well, the Leafs have won 2 games in regulation out of their last 18. So I think that the queue for about a month now, because that extends way back before the Olympics, has been that the Leafs are
Saturday night against the Sens seemed like a pretty good queue. 22-2 shots or whatever it was a nice queue.
Yeah, I mean, even in New Jersey, I think it was 47, 20-something shot. I mean, look, the Leafs have been on the wrong end of some beatings this season, and they were meant to be a contender. Like, this was not the plan. I think it's important to revisit that because it's been apparent for some time now that it's not going to go where they want it to go, but it's going even worse than I think anyone could have guessed. And so what are you trying to accomplish at this deadline? The Leafs are hoping to get some future assets, some younger players, some prospects, some picks, sell off guys that maybe aren't part of the long-term future. And as of our recording right now, I can tell you they're not getting a ton of offers. That it's not to say by any means it's not predictive, because we still have 30 hours, give or take, until the trade deadline for things to heat up and maybe the Leafs to be more involved than they are to this stage. But, the scratching of the players in New Jersey was really just a preventative measure. They were getting some calls on those guys and they've had those players on the market for some time now, is my understanding. And they just wanted to be careful. I mean, the last thing you want, of course, is to be working an Oliver Ekman-Larsson deal and then see him go down with an injury in a game. So, often when players are scratched like that, it's because a deal is imminent. That's not the case here for the Leafs. Even as of Thursday morning, I've been told they don't really have anything, too hot, at least as they start the day here. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think McMann and Laughton are the 2 players of most interest, probably because they're both pending UFAs. The Leafs haven't closed the door on signing McMann in particular, but I don't think they're going to let either of those players just play it out and walk away as free agents. So either there's a contract extension in place by Friday at 3 Eastern, or they'll be traded for something. The Ekman-Larsson deal is a little more nuanced because he's under contract for 2 more years. He's having a great season. He actually doesn't want to be traded. His partner and wife is due to give birth here in the near future. He likes Toronto. He chose to sign there as a free agent. So he'd like to stay, but I think the Leafs see some of the prices for defensemen, and so they're gauging the market on him. And so as we sit here now, I can't tell you if they're going to trade 1 player, 3 players, 6 players. They have a lot of players available in the market, but they're not getting a lot of bites on the fishing line just yet.
Okay, I've got to ask about Detroit. What makes them so interesting, CJ?
They're Buffalo light. I mean, they haven't suffered quite as long, but it's been a long time since they've been in the playoffs. And, I think they've performed to a point where the front office, feels comfortable that this is the year, I think, to push a few more assets in. I mean, you might recall last season, Dylan Larkin, voiced some displeasure after the deadline that they didn't do more to try to augment the team. I don't think we'll be in that position this time around with the Red Wings. And, we already know that they were the team trying to get Tyler Myers. He ultimately goes to Dallas instead, but, the need in their eyes for someone who can play on the right side of their blue line is still there. They've been involved on talks on players like Vinny Trocheck and some of the other centers on the market. I think, even Robert Thomas, they were inquiring. I just don't think they could get to the kind of ask that St. Louis is going to need to make that work. But, I would think when the dust clears on Friday that we'll be talking about them bringing in some help at forward in addition to a defenseman that can play on that right side. And they have the right number because of where they've drafted of prospects and draft picks. And I just think hunger, it's all aligning for them to be aggressive. So, Steve Yzerman is a little bit like Julien Brisebois, is former protege in Tampa. He likes to operate in a little bit of silence. He likes to maybe the element of surprise is in his pocket more than some other GMs, just in terms of specific info in terms of, where they're going to go. But, I'd be stunned if he was quiet at this deadline, because the opportunity to make the playoffs is sitting there. And I don't think he can leave any doubt about, giving his team the best chance to get in and make some noise. I mean, Eastern Conference, I think, could be wide open, beyond Tampa and Carolina. There's not a lot of, heavyweights or teams that have had playoff success in recent years that are going to make it.
So our colleague Pierre LeBrun was all over this yesterday, but why are we talking about Florida trading Sergei Bobrovsky? Is it as simple as him being 37 years old and on an expiring deal, and just the particulars of that situation? Because I think that's an interesting wrinkle that's been thrown in over the last 24 or 48 hours.
Yeah, I'd add the element of contract discussions between Bobrovsky and the Panthers not really going anywhere productive. That the Panthers, all things being equal, would like to keep him. I mean, it's pretty self-evident. Their goalie that's taken them to 3 straight Cup finals and won them the last 2 championships, going right from wherever his career ends to the Hall of Fame. And I think that the Panthers would like it to be from South Florida to the Hall of Fame. But, at this stage, there's nothing that appears even close in terms of an extension. There's no expectation that's going to change before the deadline. And so, Florida is a well-operated team. I think that they're looking to see, does anything make sense in terms of moving him, since we're not signing him, and they've decided they're a seller at this deadline, and they're not going to try to make an unlikely push for the playoffs with the injuries they've had and just where they sit in the standings. So, I don't know if anyone steps up and makes that deal. I think it's intriguing for a few teams. I look at a team like Montreal as an example. They've been, I think that they're a little hesitant to bring in a goalie in general, just because they feel they have their future in Jacob Fowler in the minors right now. They're not looking necessarily to acquire goaltenders with a lot of term. I don't think they're getting in on Bobrovsky, but they at least have to have the conversation. My sense is they're not going to go down that road, but, it's a different proposition to be renting a goalie. We don't see it too often, right? Usually the teams that are in the rental market for any player, have the goaltending position, locked down. I can go way, way back. Once upon a time, kids, bring out your history books. The Edmonton Oilers made a deal for Dwayne Rolson at a trade deadline and ultimately went to a Stanley Cup final back in 2006. But I mean, I'm bringing up an example from 20 years ago because this is not a common thing that happens. It's not an every year type of thing. So, you look at the struggles in the Vegas crease. I don't know. Is there someone else that makes that pitch? At this stage, I don't have any concrete info on a team making a hard push for Bobrovsky, but it's only really been in the last day or so that he's truly been on the market, and we're just sort of seeing how things sort themselves out there.
I was kind of laughing reading through Pierre's story that came out yesterday. He's like, I know about Bobrovsky. He's like, I know everyone's going to scream Oilers. They need more saves still, but can they really swap number 1 goalies twice in one season? And then he slid in that Edmonton is probably on Bobrovsky's no list anyways. So just a funny little drop in there from our friend Pierre. Do you think the Oilers are done, CJ? Like, maybe it's not a goaltending thing, but could the Oilers be doing a little bit more?
They've preserved a bit of cap space, so maybe there's another forward they can bring in. I think that they look at their team this year as it was in prior years, and look, they've lost some depth in the forward group, right? They moved on from Evander Kane and Connor Brown, and just some players that aren't headline makers at the stages of their careers, but guys who scored some big goals for them and were parts of those runs to the back-to-back Cup finals. So I think that they will hang around the market to see if anything comes to them if it's cheap. But that being said, they've spent a lot of assets in the last couple of days. I mean, they gave up a first-round pick in part to get off the money of Andrew Mangiapane, in part to get Jason Dickinson in at half retained. But either way, they still traded a first-round pick for Jason Dickinson. They made the deal for Connor Murphy. Edmonton is clearly operating, and I don't think we can blame them. I mean, this season has not gone how they envisioned, but you still have prime Connor McDavid. You still have Leon Draisaitl putting up 5 points in 5-4 wins that are just shootouts. I mean, which happened earlier this week. You've got these world beaters. You're just trying to give them any correct complement of players that can help them try to get over the hump. And when you look at how weak the Pacific Division has been, I mean, it's a tick above the American Hockey League right now, but only barely.
Just barely.
There's a path there, though. I mean, the 3 best teams in the West all play out of the Central, and only one of Colorado, Minnesota, or Dallas is going to get to the conference final, just with the way this playoff format works. And so that tells you one other team below them in the standings is going to get to the conference final and play one of those teams. And, Edmonton's vying to be that team. Obviously, Utah and Anaheim are dreaming of that too. And maybe LA can get in there. I mean, but look at Vegas. You can't discount, even though they've had a real tough go of it this season. There's still opportunity there for Edmonton. And so I think they will look to make another move to help that forward group if they can. But they're getting low on cap space and assets, so it's probably not going to be a headline grabber.
Oh, if you want a 2029 first round pick, just call Stan. He's probably got one of those. 2031. Just keep kicking the can down the road. It'll be fine.
Between Edmonton and Minnesota, there's not a lot of draft capital left. Bill Guerin likes to burn through those picks for our buddy Mike Russo.
All right. We know it's a busy time for you, CJ. So one last question for you. We can let you go. Who is, if we're scrolling through CJ's big board, and everyone should check that out. It was updated this morning on Thursday. If there's one player on this big board that we didn't talk about here that you think is very interesting, someone to watch, who would it be?
Well, I'm going to go off the big board, actually, and mention a player who's not yet on. He'll be on the next version of it, but that's Simon Nemec.
Love it.
New Jersey's kind of an interesting team for me at this deadline for the opposite reasons of all the other teams I mentioned. It's been an abject disaster, where that group is at. They had high expectations. They're way out of the playoff race. It sounds as though they've made a bunch of their defensemen available. So that's some of the veteran guys, the Dillons and Siegenthalers. But, the fact that they're looking at potentially moving on from Simon Nemec, if he can bring them back, I think an impact forward, it does sound like there's some traction there and there's some interest. So, if we've already seen trades that don't normally happen at the deadline, usually, let's face it, it's old guys on expiring contracts for futures. That's almost what the deadline is. I mean, we've seen MacKenzie Weevar with all this contract traded already, right? It's not just the old expiring guys. And so, I think we're moving into an era where more teams have cap space. So you're seeing more hockey type of trades, we'll call them, around this time of year. Also, there's no one available in free agency. I mean, anyone. I'm telling you right now, don't even worry about your July 1st. You can do whatever you want because there's not going to be anything. There's not going to be anything that exciting there if you're hoping your team buys players, just because there's most of the headline guys are off the market. So I think trades are where we have to look to, and someone like Simon Nemec, recent high draft pick, the right shot defenseman, young upside. I could see him move by Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and if that happens, it's going to be a pretty big deal that probably hasn't been discussed too much yet.
All right. So you're saying Pierre's going to go to his cottage a couple days early this year?
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Pierre is at that cottage on June 26th and 27th and 28th. He occasionally drives downtown to do a TV hit, but he does most of that period with a glass of wine from the Dach anyway.
The Dach photo is taken. We know it's taken days before and only sent out on July 1. He can't put this one past us.
Well, and I'm lucky enough. I've been a guest on that Dach literally over 15 years.
Good for you guys. Yeah, hope
I shouldn't be kicking them too hard because I want an invite back this summer.
Yeah, no kidding. This was probably it for me. I will say, I put my hat in the ring for the cottage in Milan. We went to this Canada bar for one drink, and Pierre couldn't walk 1 step without someone being like, "Oh my God, is that Pierre LeBrun?" And I just stood in front of him and said, "No, it just looks like him. Nope, just looks like Pierre LeBrun."
Bodyguard?
And I was like, "This isn't Pierre LeBrun. Leave him alone." And he's wearing a TSN jacket. I'm like, no, just a look-alike. Leave him alone.
Put in a bodyguard shift. Maybe you can get some dock time. That's the move.
I think I did a good job. Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, CJ. The bell rings at 3 p.m. Eastern for the trade deadline on Friday. You can catch CJ on TSN's Trade Center. Should be a good day. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, and don't miss our opening skit. That's all I can say.
I'm ready for it.
Okay.
My acting duties will be judged in public here pretty soon.
Great. Can't wait. Thanks so much, CJ. All right. Thank you so much to CJ for doing that. That was so nice to just be like, CJ, tell me about this, and have him sit and talk about things for 5 minutes at a time. Mute my mic and sit back.
Can you enlighten me for 25 minutes, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Please
Help
and
me
thank
feel
you.
Smarter. I do have to say the like LeBron bodyguard thing I thought was like the funniest thing that happened to me. I didn't have much free time in Italy. But I was like, this was it.
if that was the most interesting thing to happen to you in 4 weeks you were over there or whatever it was.
Outside of work, I didn't have much other like free time. So just telling people to go away, this isn't Pierre LeBrun, was
Pierre doing the Queen Elizabeth wave through the streets in Milan at his adoring public. Hello. Like,
it was truly crazy. It was wild. I've never seen anything like it. Yeah. And he was so nice. Like he was like, hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you. I was like, no, it's not. He just looks like Pierre LeBrun.
Passing out little pieces of paper with the address of the cottage, which, as we've established, of course, is 1122 Boogie Woogie Avenue, somewhere in Northern Ontario.
I better get an invite for all of my hard work.
You're a big shot TV person. That's who it's reserved for now.
No, I don't have a full-time contract.
If you don't spend X amount of minutes on Canadian national television, guess what?
You're not going.
Ain't going.
Yeah, rival networks. It's never going to happen. All right, so this came in while we were talking to CJ. This is from Darren Dreger, his TSN colleague. The Vegas Golden Knights and Washington Capitals are in ongoing discussions on a deal sending Nic Dowd to Vegas. It's not done yet, but expected to be completed this morning. So we obviously don't know the return. We don't know the details, but anything you like about the idea of that, assuming by the time we hang up this call, it will be official and this will be old news. But Sean, what do you think about Nic Dowd?
Yeah, I think Nic Dowd's still a useful player. I think he's still a pretty good defensive bottom sixer. And I think he makes sense for Vegas because he gives them flexibility to move Mitch Marner back to wing if they want. I know Marner's been playing a good bit of center over the last little bit, which is all well and good. But I think if you add Dowd, you can potentially have Eichel, Hurdle, Dowd, and then Colton Sissons down the middle if you want, or keep Mitch on the wing and just have Dowd be your fourth line center. I think that makes a ton of sense too. Frankly, I think that's the route I would take if I were Vegas at this point, because Marner's made more sense at center, frankly, over the last little bit than wing. It seems like he's a little bit more of a fit there. So I do like having Dowd in the mix really on any playoff team, because he's a good defensive fourth liner, and I think he makes a fair amount of sense for Vegas specifically. So yeah, it's fine. We'll see what the price is. I can't imagine it's much, but I think he makes them better.
Were there any big takeaways from that chat with CJ? The segment's literally just debriefing everything CJ said. The one thing that there was a ton there.
Mm-hmm.
The Leafs not really getting any calls on the guys that they've decided to put on the block. That was like, oh, that's
I mean, who should be surprised? No one should be surprised by that. This is something that,
as a girl with anxiety, I was like, oh, I feel sad.
It's something that happens to bad teams, and it's something that happens to the discourse and the dialogue around bad teams. This is across sports. We're not just talking about the NHL. We're talking about baseball, whatever. Everybody overvalues their own guys, especially when it comes time to move folks out at the deadline. And I think like the barometer of who's good and who's not gets wacky when you're talking about a team that doesn't have that many good players on it. So yeah, like Bobby McMann is one of the Leafs' 7 best forwards. That doesn't mean that he's of true value to other contenders. Like to the degree that they think, right? Like everyone loves Scott Laughton. He seems like a great dude. His leadership is, the first thing you hear people say about him, and he's been a good player in the past, particularly for the Philadelphia Flyers. That doesn't mean that he's the kind of guy that's going to net a meaningful return. So I think there's some degree of, just because Leafs fans and Toronto media is in the thick of it, where you assume that, okay, we're going to be able to trade these guys for something meaningful. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
You can't trade all the players that put you in a bad spot, for nice returns, because that's just, they have that kind of stink on them, and it's deserved.
All that said, though, they haven't ruled out signing him to a new contract either in terms of Bobby McMann. So
fine. Yeah, that's fine. Just extend all the guys that put you in this spot.
It's not Bobby
lock
McMann's
yourself
fault that the Leafs stink, Sean. Like, that's a bit much. It's not Bobby McMann's fault that they wanted him to be something he's not. That's where I always go.
You can go get
Bobby McMann didn't put the Leafs 21st in the NHL standings.
You got to go get 2 more Bobby McMahons at Bobby McMahon's previous salary. When you're talking about whatever deal he would net, in free agency, and then that just screws with your cap more potentially. Like, he's a useful he's a useful player, but part of the reason Bobby McMann is good and part of the reason Bobby McMann is worth having on a half decent team is because he's cheap, and he's about to not be cheap. So, and there are no other Bobby McMahons coming through the system for them.
Not Bobby McMann's fault. I saw this tweet
not.
from our pal Greg Wyshynski, and I know we chatted a bit about this. We didn't go there with I wouldn't call him a friend, colleague. We talked about this before recording. We didn't go there with CJ. But CJ did kind of mention it, like the pressure that is on insiders this time of year. So this was Greg's tweet. I can't recall the last time we had 3 deadline trades leak. Myers, Parayko, and Weegar without any of the main players having agreed to waive their trade protection. Like, there's been 3 trades now that they're like, there is a trade to announce, but also we don't have the details, and also the player hasn't agreed to the trade yet. So stay tuned. It's wild this year. And we're probably going to see that again today with Robert Thomas.
I know by the time this publishes, we're going to have Colton Parayko, like he'll accept it. That's because that's just our luck. I hope he doesn't. I hope he says, you know what? No, I like
on it.
I like St. Louis. My family likes St. Louis. Try again. I hope it happens because it'll be deserved.
Do we think it's GMs leaking early to put pressure on the player?
Yes.
The player's going to look like an ass if they don't say yes, even though that's why trade protection exists. It's just a loophole to be like, oh, well, Blues fans are going to hate you now because they heard that we could have gotten a first-round pick and a great prospect if you would have decided to leave. And since you didn't now, Colton Parayko, we hate your guts. So you better accept the deal because now you're going to be public enemy number 1.
If I had to guess, I would say in some cases it's a leverage play, and then in some cases it's just learned behavior because we always see NHL players waive these clauses. How often does it happen? It's rare is the case when a player wields it in a way that stops a GM from doing what they want to do. Yeah, we kind of saw it with Marner, I guess to some degree. We saw it with Panarin, but those guys are still the exception to the rule. Typically when guys have no moves or no trades, that doesn't stop something from getting done. And I hope it happens in this case. I hope Colton Parayko's playing for the Blues on Tuesday or whatever. I think it'll be completely deserved.
Would be funny. All right. As we wrap up here, I feel like I was just rambling for 8 minutes just to make sure nothing else came in under the wire. But we gotta get the CJ stuff out to the people.
It's important.
We'll just say Pierre Lebrun, our friend and colleague who we love. He has a beautiful cottage. He's such a great guy. He did kind of reiterate CJ's point on Robert Thomas. So just something to keep an eye on as Thursday continues. Trade deadline is not until tomorrow, but today feels mighty important on the Robert Thomas trade watch. This is from Pierre. As a reminder, as per his full no trade clause, any deal needs his blessing. As we've seen with other players with those clauses this week, a player needs time to digest the decision at hand. It's not to say it couldn't go tomorrow, but I would imagine leaving some wiggle room time-wise for that decision would be part of things here. So expect a Robert Thomas has been traded to TK team here, but he hasn't approved it yet. Let's wait and see. So just that's what we can keep an eye out on this Thursday.
That's Pierre being a pro. He took my point. That was the way I was going to come out here. Because guess who has a no trade clause? Robert Thomas. So we get to go through all this again. It's fun.
Yeah.
An under discussed part of Robert Thomas Wednesday was his no trade clause. That's what we're watching.
Yeah. Will he be on the move? Will he waive? We'll find out on Friday by 3 p.m. Thanks, everyone, for listening to this episode. Thank you, Sean, and to Chris Johnston for doing this. I realized after the fact that he was recording on his cell phone, so we couldn't even see text coming through. So I actually felt very bad. Once he pulled his phone off the thing, I was like, CJ, don't you have a laptop?
No, he's
stressing me
true
out.
True insider. He's just got 4 separate phones.
We're the reason CJ didn't break the Nic Dowd trade. It's fine. Dreger's his teammate, but oh my god, I felt kind of bad. The Athletic Hockey Show is going all out for the trade deadline. Look for breaking news live pods on Friday throughout the day and a trade deadline wrap show at 4 o'clock Eastern, hosted by me and a cast of athletic people who we aren't aware of yet, but they'll all be great. 8 games in the NHL Thursday night. We'll see if anyone gets pulled off the ice. Enjoy the games. Enjoy Robert Thomas watch. We'll be back tomorrow.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell to stay informed and catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And in the meantime, you can join our Discord community. We'll see you there.